The original House Republican plan called for $2.8 trillion of debt finance tax cuts. The agreed upon Senate Republican budget resolution calls for 5.8 trillion of debt finance tax cuts. So a big step up in the amount of debt financing of tax cuts we're going to see this year. Investors should take the under on the handshake agreement for 1.5 trillion in spending cuts, given that the baseline 10% blanket tariff and sectoral tariffs are likely durable. In our view, they're probably going to be durable. This is all national security. The blanket tariff, as Mr. Tariff Man has been talking about this for 40 years, he's probably not going to go below the 10% blanket tariffs. So what they're negotiating right now down in DC, in my opinion, is probably just everything on top of that from a reciprocal tariff perspective. But if we keep the 10% blanket tariffs and the sectoral tariffs, you're talking about, doing some back of the envelope math here, you're talking about somewhere between $1 and $1.5 trillion over a 10-year budget window of tariff revenue. Now, it's a melting ice cube, as Secretary Bessent has indicated, but at least in the first half of that budget window, you're talking about $100 to $150 billion per annum of money to play around with, in terms of potentially reducing the amount of spending cuts that get signed into law in this particular reconciliation bill. In fact, that's my baseline scenario, is that it's not even going to get to 1.5 trillion, because in order to get to 1.5 trillion, you got to start to cut some politically protected categories, and they're not going to want to do that. I don't think the Senate's going to go for that. And so ultimately, what's going to have to happen is President Trump's going to insert himself into the process, say, hey, guys, we're collecting billions and billions of revenue here from tariffs. So take your House Freedom Caucus member, take your spending cut expectation down, because we're getting billions and billions of revenue from tariffs. Congressional Republicans' inability to dramatically cut spending from extreme levels speaks volume to how much both parties are addicted to fiscal largesse. If you look at federal expenditures as a percent of nominal GDP, we're at 24%. We're 400 basis points above the long run mean. I mean, look at where we are. You typically only get, the only time we've ever been at 24% prior to this is during the height of COVID and during the height of the GFC, because GDP is down a lot. We're in a booming economy for the last few years, and we're at 24%. We're at like post-recession type levels of federal expenditures as a percent of GDP in a fully employed economy. I mean, this is nuts. Spending on political, and again, that's an indictment of the Biden administration. Again, they inherited this terrible, ridiculous fiscal largesse. So shame on you, Biden administration. And by the way, all this fiscal largesse helped catalyze a monetary inflation and an inflation, a 40-year high in inflation that got him voted off the island with prejudice. So, again, I'm wearing my purple tie. This is not, a Trump administration bashing ceremony. I support our president. I want him to succeed in this transition. So hopefully our intellect and our wisdom gets back to them somehow. That's why I tweet what I tweet and post what I post outside of our paywall. I want 42 macro to be involved in the discussion. I don't know why the fine folks at Bloomberg and CNBC continue to pretend like we don't exist. Well, there's $25 trillion in growing of institutional client AUM that we're advising on that does not pretend like we exist. So if you're one of the fine folks at Bloomberg and CNBC, maybe you can take your head out of the sand and shake it off and say, okay, that guy does great work. He does great work for his clients. Maybe we should invite him here and give him a seat at the table because he's trying to help the country avoid a fiscal crisis. Maybe that, who knows, or a loss of exorbitant privilege, but that's neither here nor there. Get back into the data. Spending on politically protected categories is almost greater than total federal revenue and will likely eclipse it next year. So if you look at our friend Luke Groman from Forest for the Trees, he has this true interest expense metric, which is Medicare, National Defense, net interest, and Social Security. That metric right now is 93% of federal revenue. So we're up from a long-term mean of 76%. So we're just, we're plowing we can't get off the dole. The U.S. households can't get off the dole. Or not household. It's just they don't want to turn the dole off because it makes them politically popular, and they get to keep their seats in the Congress and their seats in the Senate, and you get to win election. And this is going to become a very big problem, as we saw in early April with the bond market. Spending in politically protected categories has already eclipsed total federal revenue when including Medicaid. So if you add Medicaid to Luke's true interest expense metric, which is again Medicare, National Defense, net interest, Social Security, these are all things that are politically protected, that they don't have any interest in cutting and or can't cut, like net interest. They can jawbone the Fed, but net interest is going to go up another $100 billion this year, by the way, just as a function of refinancing into a higher interest rate regime, by the way. That is now 106% of federal revenue. So all of our revenue, more than all of our revenue, is going to these politically protected categories. And that means if we had to have some significant austerity, we'd have to cut the entire rest of the budget, the government, just to get back to a balanced budget. So that's obviously never going to happen unless the world forces austerity on us. So there's a punchline there in a few slides. A reminder, both the Democrats and Republicans love piling on debt to socialize the incomes of their constituents. So if you look at Democrat socialism, that's government social benefits divided by household income, up and to the right for decades at 18% now. If you look at Republican socialism, the effective corporate tax rate keeps going lower and lower. It's now at 15% from a high of 43% back in 1970. And guess what you can write in the middle of this? DEFICITS and DEBT. The further these two lines get apart, the more you accumulate deficits and debt in the economy. In the post-war era, Republican administrations have outpaced Democrat administrations when it comes to burdening the country with debt. I was shocked when I did this study too, to be honest with you. I was like, wow, that's a little bit different than what the consensus narrative is out there. So if you look at the cumulative growth of U.S. public debt during presidential administrations, after year one, Democrat presidents have grown debt by 6%. Republican presidents have grown debt by 5%. After year two, Democrats on a median basis have grown debt by 10%. Republican presidents have grown debt by 12%. After year three, it's 22 and 21%. And then after year four, it's 26% versus 39%. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. Republican presidents, tend to go for it in year four of their administrations. Then I said, okay, wait, year four was President Trump's, year four was COVID for President Trump. So let me get him out of the sample. And it's actually still 36%. So again, excluding President Trump's COVID year, the Republican presidents in the post-war U.S. economy have grown debt by 1,000 basis points faster throughout their administrations than Democrat presidents. You can see this on this chart here on the left here. Obviously, Democrats spend way too much. We don't have to argue about that. But more light must be shed on how Republican tax cuts are contributing to the risk of a U.S. fiscal crisis. So we're going back to the same data, the cumulative growth of U.S. public debt during presidential administrations. After I did the study, I was like, wow, let me see who the most violent offenders are. It's Ronald. It's the poster. It's the godfather of growing your way out of the debt is Mr. Ronald Reagan himself. He's number one and number two on the list. In his first term, he grew debt by 79%. In his second term, he followed that up by growing debt 56%. 7 of the top 9 of Republican presidents, Reagan, Bush, Obama, Carter, Ford, Bush, Trump, Bush, 7 of the top 9 of Republican presidents. So, like I said, more light must be shed on how Republican tax cuts, we're another year with the biggest tax cut program ever, are contributing to the risk of a fiscal crisis. It's no surprise to me that the bond market blew up this year, and it may continue to blow up if the world decides that they don't like what we're doing from a policy perspective. We've already seen a preview of it. If you disagree with that, rewind the tapes back to April 9th and April 11th. The Trump administration was forced by the bond market to learn that opponents in their 4D chess game each have their own strategic advantages to exploit. So again, it's one of my favorite charts I've ever created. Was the day the U.S. became an emerging market for 24 hours, and then again 24 hours or 48 hours later, again broad-based selling of the dollar, broad-based selling of treasuries, broad-based selling of equities, or at least on April 9th. I think equities are up on April 11th, if I'm not mistaken, because we had already pivoted. But again, this was one of the most, like I said in there, April 12th around the horn is one of the most important things I've seen in my career, and I think it was the most important dynamic we have seen since Lehman went bankrupt, because it stopped President Trump in his tracks and sent them back to the drawing board as it relates to this transition from paradigm A to paradigm B, which I'm not so sure we're going to paradigm B anymore. I think they got so spooked by this that they're abandoning paradigm B and Main Street and said, you know what, we're just going to give Wall Street even more of what it wants, which is more fiscal largesse and more monetary largesse, and hopefully it trickles down to Main Street. We were correct to warn of a Liz Truss moment in the Treasury bond market in our April macro scouting report. There will be another Liz Truss moment if the Trump administration flip-flops again on tariffs, right? This was a function of trying to bully the rest of the world into paradigm B. And you can't bully the rest of the world into paradigm B if you have a current account deficit of 4% and a fiscal deficit of 7%. You just can't do it. And we're going to talk about why you can't do it in a few slides. So right in this chart, we show the Treasury term premium continue to widen. They're now 56 basis points wide. That's about a little bit less than 100 basis points wider than shy of its long run mean of 150 basis points. If you wanted to subtract the deviation from the mean of term premium to kind of get a normalized 10-year treasury, we'd be at 5.2% right now if we had a normal level of term premium in the bond market, which based on everything I've been talking about for the past, let's call it half an hour or so, shouldn't we have a normal level of term premium in the bond market? I would argue probably should have a higher than normal level of term premium in the bond market. Like, why are we going to stop at the mean? We're going to the mean, by the way. There's no way we're not going to the mean based on everything I've said. It's just a matter of time. Why would we stop at the mean? Why don't we go back to this kind of level of term premium where it's like 200, 300, 400 basis points? I don't know. I mean, that sounds like something that could happen over the coming years. But again, this is the process. It's going to take time. So why is there going to be another Liz Truss moment if Trump flip-flops again on tariffs and starts to play Mr. Tough Guy again? Right, like right now, our North Star from a research perspective, and has been since April 9th, is that this broke President Trump. And instead of bullying the world into paradigm B, which I thought was a mistake to begin with, now he's backtracking and moving us to paradigm C. In my opinion, the smart thing to do would be to, try to finesse your way to paradigm B and most importantly, implement the kind of fiscal austerity you need to narrow our current account deficit and our fiscal deficit so that we're not as reliant on foreign capital so that they can't dictate terms to us in these negotiations. The order of operations is all wrong here, folks, especially if you're going to use bullying as a tactic. So I think they realize that. But if they unrealize that and he flip-flops again on tariffs and starts to bully again, then let's walk through how we're going to have a real serious, real legit Liz Truss moment in our bond market. Not like a 2-day Liz Truss moment like we see here. I'm talking about a real Fed's got to come out with the bazooka, which is why we're talking about this in the right Tailor section.